Welcome to Business Insider's Master Your Money live digital bootcamp. How to control your money so it doesn't control you. Presented by Fidelity. Here's our host, Tanza Loudenback.
Hello everyone, I'm calling in from Los Angeles today. My name is Tanza Loudenback and I am the personal finance correspondent at Business Insider and a certified financial planner. As you just heard, the theme for today's event is how to control your money so that it doesn't control you. This is something I've been thinking a lot about in my own life lately. All this uncertainty has put me in hyperdrive, searching for inspiration, anything to lift me up and give me perspective on all the financial challenges that have been caused by this pandemic. Well, I recently read a book that delivered. It's called The Geometry of Wealth by the behavioral finance expert Brian Portney. In the book, he makes the distinction between the quest to be rich and being wealthy. He says that the quest to be rich is just wanting more. On the other hand, wealth is funded contentment. I want to repeat that because it's so good. He says that wealth is funded contentment. When I read that, I thought, aha, that's it. That's the key to controlling your money. Figuring out what makes you content and aligning your spending and saving with those pursuits. Today's event is part of Business Insider's Master Your Money series. Master Your Money was designed to help millennials take charge of our financial future. And I'm so delighted to introduce the two experts joining us today. Our first guest is a behavioral finance expert in his own right. Dr. Preston D is a CFP and the founder and president of Concurrent Financial Planning. Hi, Preston. Where are you joining us from today?
Well, coming from Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's cold up here. Got some snow last night.
That's great. Opposite of where I'm at, but I love it. We're also joined by Kelly Lannan, who is the Vice President of Young Investors for Personal Investing at Fidelity Investments. This is Kelly's third Master Your Money event with us, and we are so excited to have her back. Welcome, Kelly. Where are you joining us from?
Hi, Tanza. Hi, Preston. So good to see you guys. I am joining from Boston, Massachusetts. So, Preston, just so you know, I am a huge Patriots fan, although I respect Aaron Rodgers. But also, as Tanza noted, this is my third time doing this with Tanza. And I just want to, before we start off, speaking of accomplishments in the year, for many of you guys who know, Tanza has been studying and working very hard to get her CFP. And I don't think she'll tell us during this broadcast, but I want to brag on top of Tanza that she actually got her CFP. So a huge congratulations. I'm sure many other folks who are listening are going through what you're going, and that is a huge accomplishment in a year of craziness. So I just wanted to personally say congrats on behalf of myself and everyone else listening today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And to all the viewers, we want your input too. So please send in your questions using the Q&A box on your screen, and I'll make sure they get to Kelly and Preston. Preston, I've been itching to ask you about the tagline for your financial planning firm, which is let your life lead your money, not your money lead your life. This fits so perfectly with our theme today. Where did that come from, and what does it mean to you?
Thanks for that question, Tanza. Actually, that came from my own life. There was a time to where there was a big disconnect to where my life and where my money aligned. And I looked at that continuously, just doing my own self-audit, and saw that there was intersection there. They were going in two different ways. And my money was definitely leading my life because I was living with regret and just bad behavioral practices and whatnot. So it was time to switch that and say, okay, what are my life's aspirations? And what do I want that to look like? And then I can use my money to fund that rather than the other way around.
I think it's a great saying. And, I think there has to be some work that has to be done to live a life that's not directed by our money. And there has to be some self-awareness to begin with. Kelly, what do you think is step one in gaining that awareness of your financial situation?
Yeah, and I think, obviously that's the most important step. And, I would say that the first step, and I'm always surprised of how many people either discount this or put this off or just don't know, is really being honest about how you're spending your money. You have to know how much is coming in versus how much is going out on a monthly basis. if you start with the facts, many people are actually surprised on how they're spending their money and what's left over at the end of the month. And again, it might sound simple, but to me, that is the very essence of what it means to start thinking about a budget. That term doesn't have to be so scary, but if you don't take that step back and evaluate this, you're never going to be able to move forward. And what the good news is about the pandemic, if we're going to lean in that way, is that now more than ever, people are actually paying attention to their money. And this is a good thing. So I hope that everyone listening, if you haven't done this yet, make sure you're doing that. In fact, multitask a little bit and definitely have a sense of, before the end of our session today, how much is coming in versus how much is going out.
I think often we know what we need to do or what we should do to get our money right, but there's something bigger standing in the way. And a lot of times that's our mindset. And this is true for so many things, whether you're trying to accomplish something in your career or trying to get really good at a hobby or anything else. I feel like our attitudes and beliefs can have a really big impact on our ability to make progress. Preston, how can people begin to explore their own money mindset, which is to say their beliefs and attitudes about money and how that shapes how they behave with their money?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, extending off what Kelly was talking about, you really have to have a willingness first. I mean, and that willingness comes, well, and I guess coupled with that would be, some courage as well. And then those facts, like Kelly was talking about, just really looking at the page and saying, okay, there's a real disconnect here about, what I aspire to do and what I'm doing. But there has to be a willingness, and there may be a pain point, or maybe a feeling point. Not necessarily a pain point. It could be that, but it also could be a feeling. It's like, okay, I want to do something else. So that's the first step, is really having that willingness and courage in order to really look at what's going on.
And Preston, do you have any sort of questions or prompts that you give to clients that you work with to help them explore their own money mindset and where these beliefs and attitudes about money come from?
Yes. One of my favorite questions is I like to deal with the near term. I mean, because you can feel it. So I like to ask, share with me a money event, a money life event, right, that's happened in the last 6 months. Tell me how you felt about that. I mean, that's the buy-in right there. How did you feel? And what would you have done differently, or what would you like to do differently, right? And then I just pause, because I want them to process that. What was that event? It could have been, I mean, we're in the middle of employee enrollment right now. I mean, and then 6 months later, somebody's like, I wish I would have put more money into that HSA account or something like that. What was that event? Or maybe it was, okay, I didn't have enough, ready cash, emergency fund, so to speak. But, what was that event? How did you feel about it? Did it make you uncomfortable? Did it align with what you want to do, what you aspire to do? How did you feel about that? And then what would have done differently, or what would you like to do differently? And that really just brings it home.
Hey, Tanza, if you don't mind me jumping in, so I've already lost count about how many times we've said the word money. And so when you talk about what one's mindset is when it comes to hearing that word, I just want to pause, and I just want to ask everyone listening, and obviously you can't tell us, but think to yourself, when you heard that term, money, what was the first feeling you felt? Did you immediately clench up and you're like, oh my God, I am so scared of money, Or did you feel like a positive feeling? Like, did you feel hopeful in where you're heading? And, I just say that because, how we all feel about money is just so different, but it is so telling. And mindset is important in so many different ways. And of course, money, unfortunately or fortunately, it touches every aspect of our life. And this year has been so hard for so many people. Some people have lost jobs. Some people have found themselves maybe going through their emergency fund. Some people have had to think very differently when it comes to their money. And so I just ask that everyone do take a step back and think about that, because, and maybe we'll get to this soon, there is a lot of things you can do to kind of help shape your mindset. And it's actually pretty funny. Fidelity, and I'm sure a lot of other companies, we recently launched this money personality quiz where you go through and you ask a few questions about yourself, and then you get your money personality after. And so I got extrovert. I mean, no shock for anyone who's listened to these sessions before. No shock there whatsoever. But it was very interesting kind of analyzing what that meant. Now, I feel like there's many facets to our personality. Like no one listening or none of us on this call talking, none of us is a one, personality, one size fits all. But it was very interesting to just hear what that meant. I like talking about people, I'm definitely leaning into my money. But then on the other hand, some of the things to be cautioned about was like, am I getting the right advice? Am I listening to the right people? So it was just very interesting. So, as always, I would just urge everyone, like look up money, personality quizzes. There's a ton of them and just see what comes back, at least a starting point.
That's a great point, Kelly. And my next question is for you, which is, how can these money mindsets or the way that, our money personality, how can that lead to certain financial habits? And is it possible to change them? I believe yes. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. So, as we've already, discussed, like let's say your money personality comes back and, it does come back maybe introvert. I'm kind of making that up. I don't obviously know all of them. And one of the characteristics of that is someone who actually hasn't take the time to plan, think about their money, analyze their spending, saving, etc. Now, what we've seen, and I would argue this is human nature, is that sometimes people, especially if they are afraid of what they'd see once they actually take that time, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I see this all the time with younger people and their credit scores, for example. A lot of people are actually afraid to check their credit scores because they're afraid of what that number is going to come out, and so they just don't do it. And we never want that. And so that's one thing. And I think as well, like in terms of our belief about money, I think the most important thing, like with everything, is that you can work to change it. It's like building a muscle. Do you know what I mean? Like none of us, if we wanted to run a marathon tomorrow, would be ready to do so. We have to train, we have to practice, we have to put some effort into that. And that's the same thing in terms of your finances and your money management. All of your beliefs, all your feelings can change over time. And yes, we might feel uncomfortable, but if we don't push ourselves, if we don't continue to harness that muscle as if we are, again, running a marathon, we're never going to actually be able to grow with our financial selves. And again, at the end of the day, we want everyone to be able to control their money. We want everyone to live the lives they want. And so the first step is acknowledging how you feel about your money and then actually working to put together a step-by-step action plan, how to grow, from those original beliefs to something more.
We have a question from the audience. Someone's asking, how do you create a budget when you have pay that varies due to commission? And I assume freelancers go through the same issue, which is that their income or their salary is not set in stone and they're getting different pay every month. How do you budget in that sense? Preston?
Yes, that money is coming like cycles, particularly commission, right? It's not constant like a fixed income, so to speak. And you can pre-fund that, so you can smooth that out. So in those times, and listen, I've been on a commission structure before, and there were some good quarters, and there were some just okay quarters, and there were some bad quarters, right? But in those really good quarters, or however your ebbs and flows of income come, then pay yourself, connect with your future self, and let that person know. It's kind of like Back to the Future, right? Connect with your future self. Tell yourself something like, when you were having all that money, it would have been nice if you'd have paid me, the person in the future, a little bit. So yes, you can smooth that out by using those high income periods and saving a little bit so you can fund the future low periods.
Yeah, and Preston, if you don't mind my adding on, and this makes a lot of sense in my opinion, and this is why a budget, a financial plan, whatever you want to call it, should be flexible, because life happens, and you just gave a perfect example, Tanza. And I think one of the main things is that even though you might not have a sense on a monthly basis or consistent basis what's coming in, you should at least take the time to understand what you're spending your money on, aka your fixed expenses. For most of us, we have the ability to understand how much we have to pay each month for rent, what our bills are, and so on and so forth. And if you are at all worried about what's coming in might fluctuate, yet you know what's fixed, what you're actually spending your money on, this is actually a perfect opportunity to also work to understand how you could possibly cut back on some of that spending. This is also a perfect example of of that advice, spend less, save more, is really tough. Because in many ways, like no matter what's coming in, we always have to spend. So if you at least understand what you actually have to spend your money on, that might give you an opportunity to cut back in certain areas if you can. I was a waitress for many years. That was actually my first job out of college. And so every week, every month, it really changed for me what was coming in, but at least know what I was spending my bills on. And to be honest, when I first got out of school, that was really scary because I was paying bills for the first time. But that really helped me ground myself on what I could actually spend my money on, as well as, let's face it, guys, we all want to have a little fun in life too. So that's why we've actually developed something called a 50-15-5 rule, which gives some flexibility. And the 50% is actually the first step, and that's actually understanding what you're spending your money on.
Yes, if I could piggyback off that just a little bit, which is, budget, right? No, I think Kelly alluded to that earlier. It's like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Spending actually helps well-being, as long as it's disciplined and within the framework of your goals. One of the things, particularly in retirement, retirees tend to have a spending issue, meaning they won't spend. So spending's okay within the framework of your plan, because it does contribute to overall well-being, and it also helps you if you're spending a little bit within the framework. Then it's also encouraging you also to stay with your savings part of that plan.
I think that's totally right. I think a lot of people, millennials and all generations, a lot of people associate spending money on things that aren't bills with guilt or shame, like buying a latte every day is going to ruin their retirement. Kelly, what's your advice for, reducing that guilt or shame feeling around spending money?
Yeah. I think this is actually a perfectly and super relevant question for now. Think about, and I'm sure many on listening in can agree with me, like if I look back to some of the things that would make me happy and what I actually would kind of bucket and what I would save my money for is things like travel, things like, traveling around with family and friends. And that's something I can't do anymore. I've been in this house for so long. When you asked me, Tanza, at the beginning of the call, like where I'm calling in from, I wanted to be like a spare bedroom. Like I've been in this room for so long, and traveling was such a passion of mine that has completely changed over the past few months. And at the same time, like I know that I need to continue to spend money on the things that still do make me happy, because I'd go crazy without it. So if that latte is the thing that makes you happy, or maybe buying a new shirt or a pair of shoes each and every month, like I think you have to give yourself the okay to spend money in those areas, especially over the past few months when it's honestly been really hard for a lot of people. And I think that's probably why we're having that conversation today. Like, I don't know about you guys, but the fact that I can no longer decipher the difference between work and home life is hard. It feels heavy, and I'm sure we're all going through that. So you have to, especially during these times, find the things that make you happy, push guilt out of your way. Sure, definitely incorporate it in your budget, but you should never be feeling guilty about something that makes you happy, because if that is something that you can look forward to, and keep things positive, we just want that for everyone at the end of the day. Life is more than just pinching pennies sometimes.
Yeah, there's this saying in personal finance that is save more, spend less. And it's supposed to be just, this blanket rule of thumb. And I always like to say, save more, spend smarter, and come up with a list of things that, I'm always going to spend money on. I'm not going to think twice about. And a lot of times that's self-care. So I think that's a great point, Kelly. We have a couple questions coming in from the audience. Everyone's really interested in budgeting. So we have someone asking for your guys' advice for college students or recent graduates on budgeting and better ways to manage money. Preston, do you have any advice for a recent graduate?
I'm from the old school a little bit, although I'm not all the way old, but or advanced in my years. But you know what? Our check register, okay? I know we're full of technology now and apps, right? Like Mint and whatnot. And you can also budget through your own checking account, because those platforms are robust as well, whatever banking institution, particularly the large ones. So you can drill down to that. But we, like Kelly mentioned earlier, we were talking about money, but we're actually talking about feeling, as well. We've said that word several times. So with the check register and you're making a purchase, then you actually have to write that down right then. I mean, you can check it out later on your app and at your bank and whatnot, and process, organize it, and all that. But having to write that down in the immediate real time, that has an effect for sure. And then you can mash that up later. But an old school check register might do the trick.
That's funny, Preston. So is that just like a checkbook? I can't remember the last time I had a checkbook. Is that check register?
Yeah. It's a register. It's a checkbook register. It goes, I used to hand those out all the time at the teller line back when I started, before I started financial planning. I learned a lot on the teller line, actually, because people share their stories every day about their money. They are coming to fund and finance their lives at the teller line, meeting those needs, making those adjustments, getting reports and saying and asking themselves, okay, what do I need money for next, and this, that, and the other. Now you go in the banks, there's not that many tellers, and there's not that many teller lines either. But I heard fabulous stories every day, and I processed 300 to 500 transactions a day. So that was a lot of stories, and that wasn't that long ago. That was late 90s, early 2000s. But writing, some things are timeless, just like a good suit, right? And writing things out is still tried and true. It's really undefeated. So writing down in the register to be a complement to all the great tools that we have electronically.
Hey, Tanza, if you don't mind me piggybacking on this, I actually just spoke to a group of college students last week, and they actually asked me a similar question, and I gave them a few pieces of advice. I think that, what Preston said is great, like writing things down, keeping track. If you're someone who doesn't have a checkbook and does maybe prefer a more digital method, there's almost too many financial apps out there to use, but a lot of them, and I understand that can feel overwhelming, almost like a Google search at this point, but there are a lot of apps out there that can actually help you keep track of your spending and saving. Apps like Mint is a perfect example. Digit is another example. Fidelity actually recently launched an app called Fidelity Spire, and you can actually integrate both your Fidelity and non-Fidelity accounts to actually understand, what your balance is, as well as where you're spending your money. So again, if you're someone who does go the more digital route and is always on your phone, which I think most of us always are, I think that's definitely a good option. Some of the other advice I gave them, and this one actually I think can also apply to recent grads, is use that student ID card. Do you know how many discounts are out there for students? Definitely take advantage. And maybe I shouldn't confess this over the air, but I graduated from grad school now almost 6 years ago, and I legit still use my student ID for some things. So definitely take advantage of that. If you're one of the lucky ones who is still in the dorms and use that, never ever buy the most expensive furniture, okay? It is going to get ruined. I think that might be a duh statement, but don't you dare spend any money on anything that's going into that dorm room. Take advantage of meal plans, okay? That's definitely always a great place to save. Don't always be ordering out, save that for later, save the Uber Eats for when you graduate. And then also another good one too is in terms of books that you need. If you can't buy a digital and again, you have to buy books, and I hope no one's really has to do that anymore, make sure you're always buying used. So always look for opportunities to save money in sometimes those smaller places. Because no, you will not 5 years down the road read that huge textbook on French literature in the 1800s. That will not happen. So these are some thoughts that I gave them, and I would carry that on to anyone who's in college listening, or possibly even those who recently graduated. And
I would tell, and one more thing after that too, is cook more. Oh my goodness, meal plans could be expensive too. So I mean, cook a little bit. I mean, you got to get into that adulting anyway, which is, that's a new word, because we got to adulting very soon, a lot sooner than this current generation. But they're also healthier a little bit too. So I mean, you can save money by cooking at home and meal prepping, as they say. Yeah.
But Preston, what if you still can't cook and you're in your 30s? I'm just kidding.
We're all dealing with that right now.
I was shocked when you asked that. I was ready for all the rest of the questions, but that one I wasn't ready for, because I was like, how cook? I mean, warm something up. I don't know.
We have some more questions from the audience. Preston, we have someone asking about whether you support the 50-20-30 rule, which is basically a framework for budgeting. And whether you support that, and if you have another framework that you use with clients.
Well, save 50%. It really depends on where you are in the life cycle, and what your goals are. So you can have like with frameworks, they're guideposts, so to speak. I mean, so you can customize them as you go. I mean, some people don't need a very high savings rate because they started earlier. So it depends. I like the framework, and then you can customize it. So you don't have to be beholden to it. That's what I'm saying. Is use it. Start that as a framework, and then say, okay, where am I in my life cycle, and then also what other saving. What's my accounts look like? Okay, and then what's my spending plan? Put that together. So use it as a framework, then customize it. Is basically what I'm saying there. It can train good behaviors for sure. I mean, because if somebody doesn't have any wherewithal of savings and then errant spending, okay, a good framework is good to discipline that.
Yeah, I think it does a lot. It goes a long way in setting up those habits, and then you can create the flexibility of it after the fact, after those habits are in place.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say we have some questions about budgeting with a spouse or with a partner that you're living with and you've combined finances. Someone's asking about how to budget together when you have different spending personalities and goals, but your finances are combined. Preston, what do you think?
This is, we're getting into relationships. Okay. Well, for sure. Couples are different. I'm writing a blog right now called She's a 4 and I'm a 3. And it has something to do with toast levels and a toaster. She likes my girlfriend likes her toast a lot darker than I do. And then when I put my piece of toast in there and it's on 4, I'm like, we're different in that matter. Okay. But, that said, when we're cooking breakfast for one another, we do use that information in order to, prepare breakfast. Same thing for finances. Yes, you may have different approaches to money, but there has to be a middle ground. And just use that information to build a together plan, because you are together. All right. So, and that's also too is having kind of like side accounts as well, so you can have your own identity. All right. But that goes into the plan too. Fund those accounts. That way, that's your own thing. And you get to keep that spending and saving identity. My parents have been married 42 years, and they've been doing that for a very long time. So, but they always were and still are in constant communication about the household finances. And that goes to what I saw as a young person. So I just carried that on into my own practices, and also in my practice of financial planning with my clients as well.
Yeah, and if I can pile on,
please.
And it's funny, I should literally ask my husband to come in and help answer this question too. But, and honestly, Preston, I think you hit upon an important point. And Tanza, maybe this is what you were also suggesting, or those who are asking the questions. I do think there is a difference between literally combining finances, aka sharing actual bank accounts, and also just making sure you're on the same page as your partner. So if by combining bank accounts, some married, they actually choose to keep things separate, while others, they choose to have joint accounts for everything. And, I would argue this really is a personal opinion of that couple. And maybe you don't do it right away, maybe it comes later, but I really see this as one bucket. And I actually do see this as separate from understanding and making sure you're at least on the same page, even before any type of marriage, to be honest. Like this should be like beginning maybe not first date conversation, but maybe as you think this is going to become more serious, you definitely want to make sure that you're on the same page as your partner. Understanding their debt, understanding if they want to own a home one day, understanding how they manage their day-to-day finances, or having children one day. These conversations have to happen. And again, I would urge you to have them sooner rather than later, personal belief. But money conversations, can come up at all different stages of life. And it's very important you're on the same page. For example, we actually have done like couples and money studies at Fidelity. And something that is always interesting me, like shocks me, is that a lot of couples, they actually have no idea how much their partner makes in terms of their salary. And so I remember reading this, and I literally look at Brendan, he's my husband. I was like, hey, honey, you know how much I make, right? But that's the truth, is that money conversations are very difficult. Many people would rather talk about health issues than money issues, and this is just the way of life. So I think that's very important, and that's why I was almost argue that this is almost more important than taking that step to combine bank accounts. Because if you're not on the same page about money, it might be a lot harder to sustain that relationship. I'm guessing over the course of, I'm not a marriage counselor or anything by any means, but just from what I've seen. And so it might not just be about salary, but understanding if you're on the same page of what you actually want out of your money is super important in any start of relationship.
Mm-hmm. And if I could extend off of that too, and we're saying the same thing, which is communication for sure. About one's finances. And before, man, and again, this is personal preference too, like Kelly alluded to, we're not marriage counselors, although there is a discipline in our profession called financial therapy that does deal with these type of things. So communication is very important before and throughout. But when you're talking about combining, that's probably best, left to when the actual marriage starts, as far as total combination. But definitely communication at the start and throughout.
I think that's great advice. And especially starting with those just conversations about your money beliefs and your money attitudes and how you feel about spending and what's important to you and what your values are. I think all that stuff should probably take place before the actual dollars and cents are combined. Mm-hmm. We have another question from an audience member who's saying, I hope to have a family someday within about 3 to 5 years. What's your advice for saving money during changing times like that? And I'm assuming during difficult financial times like right now. What's your advice for saving and preparing for goals that are going to be happening in the next couple of years? Kelly?
Yeah, I guess, first of all, congrats that it's that specific on when you want to have a family, and that's awesome to hear. I feel as though the best money habit that you can practice during both times of uncertainty, as we're going through now, as well as some of those more longer term goals, such as starting a family one day or buying a home or even retirement, is consistent and automated savings. I think this is so important. If you choose a set amount that is automatically coming out of your bank account and going into an account for things like, retirement or some of those longer term goals, the whole set it and forget it mentality. Of course, you don't want to completely forget it, but again, there is a lot of power to automating. I think that is so important. Automate it every single month so you don't even see it. And even though, again, $20, $25, $50 a month can seem like a little, it certainly pays off in the long run, especially if you are actually putting that money to work and investing that money, because you can take advantage of compounding. And again, never too late to get started. And I think the other thing too, and I think I've already mentioned this before, and this is honestly human nature. Like, for example, like during terms of uncertainty, don't put things off. Don't let inertia kind of take over your life. Make sure you take action now, because as I mentioned, even those small amounts can pay off big time in the future, and your future child or your future goal, will definitely thank you once you have a little bit of money saved aside for it.
Yeah, in fact, extend off of that just a little bit. Be nimble during times of uncertainty. First of all, uncertainty is certain. Uncertainty is going to happen. It's always there. There's different levels of uncertainty, and we're dealing with a big time uncertainty right now with the pandemic. That said, if you have the mindset that, not necessarily, a fear like, hey, listen, something's always going to go wrong. No, there's just always going to be some event. But you can be ready for that. That way you can smooth that out. I would also say too, yes, having those automations are fabulous. That said, during times of uncertainty, you may have to be nimble a little bit and say, okay, yes, I want to keep those automations in place, say like saving for retirement and an automatic savings towards 401k, for example. But you may need to tamper down the contributions or even the savings rate to manage the right now. Manage the moment, because that's going to help you maximize the future. So there shouldn't be any shame or guilt to having to build up access to funds right now. Let yourself be nimble in the near term. Keep those habits up, but you may have to tamper them down just a tad in order to take care of the right now and then ramp those back up once we start getting a little bit more smoother, economy and all that.
I love that strategy. And I think in the context of our current times, there's obviously things we can't control, which, a financial market crash or the pandemic or what we're spending money on. And I think that obviously there are also systemic issues that have been around for many, many years, and we can perhaps hope and begin to change those systems with our vote. But for now, there are some things in our control. Kelly, how do you think that people can thrive during times like this, uncertain times, but also financially challenging times? Is it just a matter of being well prepared with that emergency fund and that plan?
Yeah, and I think that is a really good, first step. And as Preston, as you just said, Tanza, there is uncertainty is always, it's a given. And one of my life mottos, not just in the financial world, but life, whether it comes to work or family life, is that there's so much we can't control. But take what you can control and kick the crap out of it. So again, and that's kind of what I turn a little bit to the automation and again, making sure you're consistent, is that those are things that I can control. And I would always start with an emergency fund. That should be step one. Is make sure you have money set aside in case the unexpected happens. Now, I think for some listening, for example, Fidelity's guidelines and kind of posts that we have anywhere from 3 to 6 months of your essential expenses set aside in an emergency fund. Well, now we're past that in terms of the pandemic. So I completely understand that, but that has to be your first step. Always make sure there's money set aside in case the unexpected happens. And then from there, really understand some of those other essential things that you, again, want to continue to contribute to. Because I agree with Preston that we have to take care of the right now and the right here. But I would just also caution against, only prioritizing the short term and thinking more long term. And this is where some of those things like mindset comes in. If you're only thinking about the here and now, if you're only living paycheck to paycheck, if you're only thinking about the short term, you're going to be limiting yourself to the other possibilities that might exist out there. And again, you might not think about what is long term. So
I just wanted to
do you have any strategies for that?
For
kind of grounding yourself during those uncertain times, whether, mindset strategies or behavioral strategies. I remember when we talked before, you brought up something that I think was inspired by Oprah, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes. I wanted to kind of tie into that last point, which is, we're trying to protect our household and like smooth our well-being, our utility over time. And it's part of the short term. When you're going through something, a large amount of uncertainty, you do have to manage that in order to continue with the long term. But yes, to Kelly's point, you don't want to always be talking about the short term and just living in the short term consistently. But when times do call for it, yes, you do have to mind the now in order to do the future. But yes, to your point about kind of like managing your well-being, Oprah used to have this, moment in on her TV show. She was like, oh, something fabulous will always happen. I was like, okay, well, that's kind of like an ah moment, what she was saying. And there's so many definitions of what people's ah moment is or whatnot. And mine kind of framework is the 3 A's, which is, and Kelly touched on this earlier too, which is when you're going through something or when you're not going through something. If you're willing to address your money, okay, what's that first A, which is, okay, admit where you are, okay? Be truthful about that, okay? And then acknowledge your feelings about that. That's the second A, because you have to process the feelings and emotions. That's regret, that's, shame, and that's the things that you may have not accomplished, all that, okay? Then forgive oneself. That's very important, all right? And then that third A is take action. You can't take action without the first two. If you haven't admitted where you are and be truthful about that, get the facts, and then process those feelings, acknowledge those feelings, because they're valid. All right, so let yourself have that moment, but also forgive, and then use and move. So that's that action point. So that's the ah moment.
I love this strategy. I'm going to write it down on a sticky note and post it on my computer so that I remember every time I'm in one of those moments that I can just move through this sequence. I think it's great. But the reality is, of course, that a lot of people associate money with stress and anxious feelings. And, this has a name in behavioral finance, which is a scarcity mindset. It's kind of the idea that, there's never going to be enough. Preston, can you explain some of the other characteristics of a scarcity mindset and how someone can identify that in themselves?
Yes, scarcity, and some of this is warranted sometimes. However, not consistent or persistently. Those are scarcity is, I don't think there's going to be enough. I'm always thinking about running out of things, a lot of stress and anxiety, and it's persistent. And it may not even have a good reference point or a good factual base. It's just one of those characters that we have inside of us, and it may be too. I caution against saying one shouldn't have the scarcity mindset. Childhood or early adulthood or maybe events in life may have encouraged encourage this type of mindset. But how we need to acknowledge it and then reverse it. Okay, because not all the time things are going to be coming up short, or we're going to run out, and that type of fear and controlling one's life. And number one, it's just not healthy for overall well-being. It could stagnate, financial progression as well.
And Kelly, you work closely with millennials, and I know that there seems to be a common feeling that the Instagram generation, myself included, always feels like, everyone has more than me. I'm never going to live up to these other, to these standards or to my friends or people I see online. What advice do you have for those people?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because we've actually found in some of our studies that, the fear of FOMO is real. The fear of missing out is real. And now with Instagram, we're not just comparing ourselves against the friends, aka the people we've actually spoke to before, but we click on that Explore More tab on Insta and we see people we haven't even met before doing crazy things. Like, who the heck is traveling to Greece during the pandemic? I would love to know and meet you and maybe get on your private jet. But this is just a reality. And sometimes that fear of missing out, that feeling I have to keep up, is often the number one reason why people do overspend. And I guess my biggest piece of advice, especially in trying to move past this scarcity mindset, and we touched upon it a few times, it really can give this doom and gloom, feeling. Because if you already feel like you don't have enough, it can feel very daunting and that your situation will never get better. And in terms of finances, I was talking about this last week with actually one of the students I was speaking to. It's like debt is such an issue for a lot of younger people. And, relating this to money, sometimes there's a lot of people who feel so deep into their debt. It's like, what's the point? What's the point of even trying to save for anything else? Because that's like a hole that they can't dig themselves out of. And so going back to your question, Tanza, my biggest piece of advice, and this is hard, okay, so I'm not saying it's easy, is people have to stop comparing yourselves to others, especially over social media. And we know that it's hard. But in Tanza, I wish I didn't have a pen at the time, but you had a great quote at the beginning of today's session, is that I think the number one thing is you have to define your own happiness. You have to define your own goals, because we all know what makes us happy. We do, and you have to start to align your money to your values, to the things that make you happy. And that can be at least an important first step in trying to not compare yourself too much to others.
Oh, wow. Can I just chime in? I was moved by that. Oh, Kelly, that's spot on. Comparing yourself to others. For real. I mean, yes, it is. It's like, the question is like, well, when you're going through your feed, and it's like, okay, well, how are they doing that? But that's the wrong question. The question is like, okay, what would you rather be doing? And then how do you go about planning to get to that goal, right? Not what they're doing. How do they do that? No, it's like, okay, what do you want to do? And then plan to do that. Yeah, that was great, Kelly.
Yeah, and have you guys ever found too, we often have no idea what's also going on in people's lives. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's the other thing. And similarly, people don't know what's going on in our lives. And, we had this gentleman, he's actually an astronaut. He came in and spoke to our cohort last year. And then he actually showed up in another meeting this year. And he said something that I always carry with me. He's like, if you don't like someone, it's probably because you don't know them well enough yet. So I just always carry that with me, because even through all the shiny facade of Instagram, we never what's really going on in one's life, as people don't know what's going ours. And so again, don't compare yourself to others, because you never know what's going on behind that perfectly filtered photo that you see on social media.
I totally agree. And Preston, I know you're a big fan of gratitude, and I'm sure Kelly, you are too. With Preston, we had a conversation about this. And gratitude is a characteristic of having an abundance mindset, which is, on paper, the opposite of a scarcity mindset. Can you explain what that means and how gratitude can fit into all of this?
Yes. Gratitude really, it's a daily thing. When something is occurring, okay, and we can talk about it during this pandemic, but it's really every day. What are we most thankful for? I'll say it like this too. Contentment is not settling. All right. Contentment is finding your space and having gratitude about that. There was I love the Rocky series, the Sylvester Stallone movies. And there's a couple of times through that whole series, particularly like 1 through 3, and Adrian and Rocky are having a conversation. And this is when like Rocky was poor, right? Or they were poor as a unit. And Rocky was always wanting to, I want to buy you these things, Adrian. I want to give you a big house. And Adrian just simply said, I want to be with you, Rock, and I want to see you be successful in the things that you love. That's gratitude. Just asking yourself, do I have what I need? Am I living the life that I'm aspiring to? Do I have the opportunity to aspire? As long as you're building toward your aspiration, that's in of itself some gratitude. So all that plays into the role of changing that mindset from scarcity to abundance.
Wait, stop. I love how you just referenced Rocky. Rocky 4 is one of my favorite movies. Rocky literally ends the Cold War. But yeah, sorry, Tanza, I know we're deviating, but I just loved that reference to Rocky, so it made me very happy.
That's okay. I think that, gratitude is a huge thing, and that it comes up in so many areas of our life. It's just being, intentional about it and remembering that it can help you be better with money. It can help you in so many ways progress in life. And we have a question from the audience. Someone is asking, what are some important values that I can put into my mind to constantly remind myself that I do have control over spending my money? Kelly, do you want to take this?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And for a second, I thought it was going to be like, "What's your favorite Rocky movie?" But no, I think that's a great question. And a lot of times, values that you care about are really centered upon yourself. So I just say that because it's never a one size fits all. If you value something like giving back to charity, for example, when we've actually found, especially with younger people who are riddled with debt and maybe don't have enough money, they're still giving back because it's so ingrained in something they value. That's a perfect example of, even though you might actually not have the budget to give back, it is still important to you. So you're still going to do whatever you have in your power to align some of your money towards that. It's similar, like if you do value paying off your debt, make sure you do prioritize that. And maybe you put a little bit more towards your debt, towards other things. If you're someone who values, having a family one day and having a home for them and owning a home, again, that is aligning to your money goals. And that can also be something, going back to my previous point, that will stop you from comparing yourself to others because you're really secure in the things you care about and you're aligning your money towards that. So I do think it is a very personal issue. But at the same time, we all have things we value. We all have things we care about. And, going off this question a little bit, I constantly get the question around, essential expenses. Like, what actually is essential? Now, what's essential to me might not be essential to everyone else. Like, for example, I love working out. It gives me a sense of calm. And if I'm frustrated or have a bad meeting or anything like that, like I'll go for a run. And that's something I value. And so a gym membership, when we were going to the gym, was something that I'd be more than willing to pay for, versus someone else, they might not value that. And they might not align any of your money towards that. So that's just an example of how we can be flexible with how we're defining the essential items in our life as well.
I think that's so important. And you just mentioned like going to the gym or working out is a value that you hold, and you make sure that your spending is aligned with that. Preston, do you have anything like that? I think it's helpful for people to hear examples of values, because it can seem kind of pie in the sky when we're like, figure out your values and align everything. Do you have any examples of things that you value that you make sure to include in your budget or your spending plan?
Yes. To extend what Kelly was talking about too, at certain times you may not be able to do monetarily what you like, as far as what you value, like giving back. But there, you do have something that you can give back, which is time. And personal finance is what it is. It's personal. So, and it goes right back to how we kicked off to the show, which is, let your life lead your money. That is the first thing. What is it that you aspire to do? What do you value? What are your goals? That's right there. Let's start there. Then the money is not necessarily second. It's a complement. So it's a partner. But those are the steps. But as far as something that I value, I still have student loan debt. Ph.D.s are not free, so I had to take on some of that, and I'm going to vigorously attack that. That goes back to my relationships with debt during periods to where my money and my life wasn't aligned. Okay, I didn't like how that felt. And then it also extends all the way back to, my childhood, as far as, my parents and my grandparents. My granddad, and my grandmother for that matter, they didn't like a whole bunch of debt, So that's something that's been passed down generationally. Now, sometimes you do have to have debt, and that's fine. I mean, there shouldn't be any shame against that, because you go about, addressing that as time passes. That said, that was just something that I experienced in my childhood, and I just brought it all the way forward. And another point in my life to where I didn't like when I had debt that was undisciplined, and it was because of some lifestyle choice that I made or whatnot. So right now it's about debt, and I'm considering, like Kelly, I'm considering a tennis club membership, because I need to lose a few, and I enjoy tennis. So.
I think that's one thing the pandemic has uncovered, is that we all need to get out more. We have this itch to get out and be active, and it's important to me too. We have another question from the audience. Someone is asking, what is one personal finance book that each of you would recommend reading? Let's start with Kelly.
Yeah, that's actually I actually have one behind me. Broke Millennial Takes on Investing. A woman named Erin Lowry, who I've actually had the opportunity to work with a few times in the past, and so I just think is wonderful. This is actually her second book. Her first book was just around, the younger generation and how they're dealing with money, and I think she's actually coming out with a third book on one of the questions that was asked today on talking about money with either a partner or friends, family, etc. So I would definitely recommend this, especially if anyone is interested in possibly getting started with investing. I think the other thing too is that she has a great Instagram, and for anyone out there, I know you're on it, and I know maybe you're not following the correct people, but Erin is a great example of someone, as well as there's a lot of other financial bloggers out there too that are going through a lot of the same things many of us are going through, and they're talking about it and they're giving us advice. So they're often, for me, excellent sources of both inspiration and education, because I'm at least trying to constantly educate myself when it comes to finance.
Preston, what about you?
Wow, there's so many, so I don't have one like at reach like Kelly does, but I would say I do have a few authors in mind, and they're really centered around life-centered planning. I mean, that's really a movement. It's kind of like FIRE, the FIRE generation and all this other stuff. But like the Mitch Anthony's of the world, Rick Kaler, Sarah Acevedo. There's so many life-centered planning. George Kinder, and there's just so many. So excuse me for leaving anybody out, because I know a lot of folks. But that's the life-centered planning, which is what we're talking about today. Let's define the life. Let's audit the life. Let's do all that, and then the money plugs right into that. After that, it's transformational. It's transformational. So that's what I suggest reading, so some of those authors, and just defining one's life and then plugging the money into the life. Yes.
That's great. And I'm going to jump in too. And the book I quoted at the beginning of our event today was The Geometry of Wealth by Brian Portney. He's a behavioral finance expert. I just discovered the book and thought it was new. It's actually 2 years old, but reads like it was written yesterday. And, you know, his thing is, he says that wealth is funded contentment, which is, you know, figuring out what you value and what your goals are and underwriting that with money. And he takes a really great, you know, psychology of money approach to things. And it's a great book that I would recommend any of you check out. So this conversation today has really helped me understand what it means to control my money. And I hope it's done that for you all. The most important thing I think to remember is that financial success isn't linear. It doesn't move in a straight line. But when you have the right tools and the right mindset, it can be a much, much smoother ride. I want to thank Kelly from Fidelity Investments and Preston from Concurrent Financial Planning for being here with us today. And thanks to all of you for watching and joining in today's session. If you could stick around for a moment and fill out the survey that pops up on your screen and give us some feedback so we can improve for future events, that would be very much appreciated. Today's event concludes our Master Your Money live digital bootcamp series presented by Fidelity. Thanks everyone for watching.